Okay, we're going to start with a raw image, just a few general tweaks in Adobe Camera Raw brought into Photoshop, and I'm going to show you how you can balance your shadows and your highlights in this edit. Now I'm going to do the complete edit. I'm going to use Topaz Impressions as a plugin for a more painterly look and a couple other tweaks, but this image was shot with the Westcott Solix lights, continuous light, one directly camera left to her, and I just used a reflector, and I did light the background up with a strip light from Westcott Solix as well. And I really wanted the contrast look to this, which I find lends itself to more of a painterly feeling other than, you know, if you shoot something with just basic flat light. So yeah, let's get started. First thing I'm going to do is flatten my image like so, and then the first thing that I do after that is I duplicate my layer and I just get rid of, you know, the things that I find distracting to my eye, which in this case is just a couple wrinkles in the backdrop. This is a backdrop that I made, and I don't know if this one's available for sale at Intuition. I would have to look, but I don't think so. I think this one is just one I had printed, but it's definitely one of my favorite ones. Okay, so those distractions are gone. Now we have to focus on this distraction here. So what we're going to do is just try and select this general area, and we'll probably use, I'm going to zoom in and make sure my selection is better, but we're going to use that technique for color changing, and I'll show you how to do it. If you haven't seen the previous video, I will post it in the link below so you can see that one as well. So it doesn't have to be perfect, but you should get all of those colors included in your selection if you want to make sure that they're affected. It's just easier if you make your selection perfect initially so that you don't have to come back and refine the mask too terribly much. So what we're going to do for this is just come down here to our adjustment layers and choose gradient map, and click on your gradient map, and now we're going to come up to basics, and I'm just going to click on this one here, and I'm going to click right in the middle, and I'm going to choose a color from the wing somewhere over here, and let's see if we can find this color. Unfortunately, we cannot. Okay, let's just find one that's similar. Something like this. So you see, if you can get relatively close to the color that's already there, it's going to work fairly well. Click OK. And if you slide this slider to the right, it's going to get darker. If you slide it to the left, it's going to get lighter. Okay, so I'd say that looks pretty good. Click OK, and now we're just going to come into our mask and refine it with a soft plain brush. I'm at about 13% flow, and I'm just going to brush that on. This is taking it off, which we don't want. So I'm just going to make sure I'm on my white brush, sorry, and blend it in, because you can see there's green down here. So this is a nice, quick, easy way to just kind of match the colors, I would say. That's pretty good. And now we can increase that by just creating a new layer, color mode, blend mode, sample that color, and then you can just come in and paint that color onto the rest of the wings so that it looks a little bit more seamless. Okay, so now that that's done, I have one more thing I want to do, and that's to reduce the brightness of that hotspot. And for that, we're going to use my plugin over here. I'll show you in a second. So just, oh, up here too. This is her other wing, so don't forget this one. Up here. Okay, so that looks better. I'm gonna go ahead and flatten this, guys, like so. And now we're gonna open up this plugin, which is called Lumenzia, and I've talked about it in a previous video, which I will link below. So now what we're gonna do is we're going to hold down our Shift key, click on our curves adjustment layer. We're gonna choose curves for all wide zones as blend if, click OK. We're gonna let it run and do its thing. And this is an amazing, amazing plugin that you can bring details out of your shadows. Like, let's say you've created a vignette that's way too dark and now it's difficult to bring back detail. You could try this. So, but it's also great for reducing extreme highlights. So I'm going to double click on the first mask because this is for the highlights, and I'm going to just pull this down. And I'm only looking at that bright spot. Do you see how it pulls it down? And I'm going to try and bring back a little bit more of the detail by adding a darker curves adjustment like this. And then I'm just going to come back here and hold Option and click the mask, and now I'm going to paint that just on that area because I don't really want to remove all the highlights and the brighter parts of the image that I'd like to keep. So that looks better. And then what you can do, I usually use these all for dodging and burning, so I'll try and do a little bit of increasing the highlights in her face. There you can see they got a little bit brighter, like so. And then you can come down to the last one, which is all your darkest blacks, and you can pull that down a bit. That's going to add some darkness, but when I do that, you can see that it's adding too much darkness on her. But I do like the effect, so I'm going to once again hold down my Alt or Option key, click mask, and now I can paint that only on the areas that I would like to actually affect. So it's going to be the brighter areas in here. And just create a bit more of a vignette on this side. Like so. I'm gonna just add a little bit to this. It's a little bright. Okay, close the whole group before and after, so you can see it's added a lot more impact to this image. We're just going to do some basic skin retouching on her really quick here, get rid of some shadows and highlights that don't necessarily belong. I'm just going to do this with a frequency separation using the mixer brush, and it's the quickest, easiest way, especially for an image like this that's going to have more of a painting feel to it because I'm going to use topaz impressions. So I really just want to use this to quickly get rid of the, like for instance, the forehead bumps. And I'm going to use my mixer brush. So click on the low layer from frequency, if it will actually start working. And then go to my mixer brush. For some reason, it looks like Photoshop is acting up. So go to my mixer brush. And I'm going to make sure I'm working on a transparent layer. So turn off the paint layer. My flow is going to be around 24-ish%, and load and wet is usually around 50. Doesn't have to be exact. And we're just going to come in and we're going to not do that. So what you need to make sure is sample all layers is turned off when you do this. Otherwise you'll get that really nasty sharpness. So wherever your brush lays down, that's the color that you're pushing around. So I'm trying to get rid of the forehead lumps. Everybody's bone structure and skeleton is different, so we'll get rid of that. And I'm just using little tiny circles with this mixer brush. It just works better when you do little tiny circles. Yeah, normally I would come in and do, you know, remove blemishes and stuff like that, but because I'm going to use a paint plugin, I'm not going to really concern myself too much with that. And just zoom out. And so that's done. I'm going to come back in obviously with some dodging and burning, but I'm just going to soften some of the backdrop here with the mixer brush. This is a really great tool for fabric backdrops, you know, anything that might have lines or wrinkles that you want to get rid of or soften. Okay, I'm going to go back to my Lumenzia plugin, do the same thing, hold down Shift, click on Curves, and click OK. And now I'm going to focus on trying to brighten up her skin a little bit, just a little bit more. I do see that I need to do a little bit of liquify in there. So the top one are the brightest highlights like we fixed in the earlier portion. So this one I'm going to kind of go to the mid-tones because I think her skin is more in the mid-tones. And we're just going to pull this up to see how much brighter we can get it. And that looks better. I'm going to go down one and do the same thing. Just about there. Okay. So the same thing I'm going to do. I'm going to close the whole group and I'm going to hold down my Option key and just go ahead and create a black mask. And now I can paint both of those layers together as one. I'm going to reduce down to around 25 flow. And now I'm just going to come in and brighten those areas up a little bit. You don't want to do too much because you don't want to undo all of the beautiful contrast that we've made with our initial adjustments. Just want to make sure that you don't get that white halo around the areas when masking. Okay, let's zoom in a bit. I think that's okay. Before and after, so we've brightened it up, but now it's a little bit too orange, as you can see. So we're going to come in and we're going to go to our hue saturation. I'm pretty sure it's going to be red. Let's just let the Photoshop is lagging today. Spinning wheel of death. So we're just going to sample that, and yeah, it's red. So we're just going to reduce that down a little bit. I might pull this to the right by a couple just to add in a bit of green. I do that often if there's too much red. I'm going to actually change this to 1. I don't want it too green. Boy, what is up with Photoshop today? There, pull that down just a smidge. Let's take a look at the difference before and after. Okay, that's better. And that's better. Might actually reduce this just a little bit, right about there. Good to go. So I'm flattening and I'm saving, and now I'm going to work on the environment before I pull it into Topaz. I might actually do a little bit of liquify really quick. So filter, liquify. And this is just personal preference, but I like to just make sure that the waist looks thinner. And then right here on her chin looks a little off from the hair. Bring her chin down a bit. That's pretty good. Let's just poof out her hair a bit. Like so. We're probably going to get rid of, oh, that's the wing though, right? But it looks like it's coming right out of her head. But so it's difficult to differentiate the wing from the headpiece. So I think what we're going to do is grab our select tool, and we're going to come in and we're going to just select this piece of headpiece, and we're going to apply that same technique that we did on the wing. I'm going to refine it using my lasso tool. Okay, so this is what we're going to do. We are going to try and sample this image, this color here. So adjustments, gradient map, and it's going to default back to the previous one we had, which actually might just work. Let's see if we can refine that mask a bit by feathering out the edges so it's not such a hard line. Let's see, right about here. And then just reduce it a little bit. To me, it doesn't look perfect. So let's add a light color in here. I think we might make this one here just a little bit lighter. Click OK. And let's just back this up and see. It looks off. So let's reduce that. And then we lose all the detail when we do that. So that's not very good. First world problems. Actually, let's try changing the blend mode to overlay. That's better. It's a little orange, so I think what we'll do is come up here and add a hue saturation. We're going to clip it below, and we're going to see if we can just adjust that color. I don't want it too green, but it's definitely too orange compared to the rest. I think that's probably the best we're going to get. So I'm just going to leave this now, flatten it, and we're going to head over to our environment. So overlay blend mode on a blank layer. And this is where you can work on your vignette. I just choose a color that already exists in that area. I'm just going to deepen it down now. I just sampled the existing colors in the image so that it looks a little bit more realistic. You can always add a mask if you've gone a little too heavy in places, and just brush some of that off. And that's just it. Like, don't be afraid to realize that you may have gone too far in some places, and go ahead and brush it off. I'm just going to feather that out, my mask. I still want a little bit here though, but I did already brush that off. So I'm going to use multiply blend mode really quick and just reduce my flow down. I don't want it to be too heavy-handed, but I want to get rid of some of these kind of spots. So we're really trying to create the vignette so that it maintains the light around her, but I don't want it to be a pure black vignette, because then that is almost more distracting. Okay, so this is, I'll show you, I will combine these together and I'll show you the before and after. So we've just kind of balanced the image now so that there's not so much light on the one side. I'm gonna go ahead and flatten this and save it, and then I'm gonna run Topaz. I might actually do glow and impressions and clarity, but we'll see. Okay, so for this plugin to work, you have to duplicate your layer. I'm gonna come down to Topaz Studio. Let's start with glow. Glow works really nicely to start with, and then you can go into impression. So this is impression. It always defaults to the glow workflow, which is super cool if you want ridiculously sharp images, but I'm going to come down to contrast and color. So that's going to be right here. So if I click this, you can see that it really adds a glow. I'm going to come into, I believe there's overall lightness. We're just going to pull that up a bit, and we're going to pull down the saturation because it's too orange again. And I'm just going to click OK. Now we're not going to leave this image like this. What we're going to do is we're going to let it apply, and then we're going to pull this opacity down, down, down. I just want a little bit of glow. I don't want too much. It just adds a little bit. So now we're going to come in and we're going to duplicate our layer again, and we're going to go this time to Topaz Impression. So I usually leave it on the default, which is just the workflow up here, and I usually like to choose a smaller brush, so one of these, and I'll increase the size to get rid of the white spots right about here. And now I'll increase the stroke length for a bit more detail and reduce the spill. I don't really typically like a lot of spill. I'm just going to work on that brush just a bit more to see if I can get rid of the spots. That's good. Come down here to lighting and increase our contrast a bit. And then click OK. Okay, so once again, we're going to reduce it all the way down, and then we're slowly going to pull it up. What I'm looking for is a painting look in the flowers and the backdrop and the fabric that she's wearing. So probably somewhere, actually let's just focus on the flowers for this round. And then Option Alt Mask, and now paint whatever effect you want onto the portions of the image. So I'm going to focus on the flowers here because they're a little bit too realistic looking. Also back here, a little bit over here. We're just looking for that painting look. So this softens all of the lines. You could come in and do a little bit on the headpiece just to get rid of some of the photographic looks. Maybe soften up the lace on her dress so that it's not so sharp. I try to stay off the skin a bit for the first round. And this just adds a nice little softness to the image. Okay, before and after. So now we've got some softening. I'm going to feather that mask out. I'm just going to paint away the edges here. I see some abstract little painting pieces. Okay, so that is starting to look better. Flatten, save. So there's still detail in the shadows. You can still actually see the entire scene, right? So you could go back in and refine your dodging and burning if you wanted to now. Let's just see how that works out in Lumenzia. And this is just the thing, guys. Like, you do various steps over and over and over again to really zero in on your shadows and your highlights. So I'm gonna go to my shadows and pull them up just a little bit. And again, this is done by coming back and painting this back on. That looks good. Let's add a little bit of highlight for her skin. A little bit here. Okay, so we're going to do the same thing that we did before. Before I do that though, I'm going to go right down to our blacks and I'm just going to pull them up a tiny bit like that. Okay, close the group before and after. So Option Alt Mask, and now we can paint. So I want a little bit more detail in the shadows. A little bit more detail on her. Just got to be careful that I don't paint that lightness back onto this already too bright portion of the wing. And then feather that mask out again. But let's just take a look at before and after. So now you can really see how if your blacks are getting a little bit too dark, you can come in here and you can just refine them using that. And this image, for all intents and purposes, is almost finished. Now what we need to do is our color toning, and that will really complement and finish the image off nicely. So we'll come in here, we'll go to selective color, we'll start with our blacks, might add some red into those shadows, probably a -1, and then yellows a -2. And this is just the beginning. Let's go back to neutrals. I might add a little bit of blue into the neutrals. -2, and maybe a +1 in the cyans. And that's just going to help everything complement each other as far as color toning. And in the whites here, a little bit of yellow I think would be nice. And this is before and this is after. So we've cooled down some of those oranger, yellower colors, but I can still see a whole bunch of color issues in her skin. So the only way that I can really help that is to do a soft light blend mode. And then, like, because this part of her face here is gray compared to this part here that's super dark orange. This here is more of a grayish pink, and this is more of an orange again. So we need to balance it out with one steady color. So I'm just going to choose a flesh color and come in and try and affect it this way. Soft light blend mode will lighten the portion of the image that you're affecting. So you're going to want to definitely reduce the opacity after you finish applying this. So just reduce. Before and after. And just adjust it to suit. Okay. Ta-da. Now I'm just going to run one of my actions. For this one, I'm probably going to just use my fairy portrait. This one's for dark images, and I'll run that. And these actions, I've made them specifically for the lighting, the mood, the art of fairy portraits. So starting from the base, you can tweak each one to suit the image itself. I don't know any actions that work perfect on an image straight out of the gate unless it was the image used to create the action in the first place. Contrast, I don't think we need the contrast. Fairy coloring, let's reduce this. So that's actually really nice because you've got the teal that's really complementing the oranges in her skin. Here's a vignette. I don't feel like we need it, and then we have our typical gradient. So what we're going to do is reduce the size of this gradient to 90, and we're going to drag it right about here and then reduce it. Definitely don't want it too bright. Okay, close the whole group, turn it on, turn it off. So you can see that it's really finished the image nicely. I do still think I want to reduce this a little bit more. Right about there. And that's it. So that's how you can really make an image not look like the blacks are clipped and not look, you know, overly done. I could go back and do a couple more impression run-throughs to make it look more like a painting. We'll try one more just to see what we can come up with, and then I think there was one more thing I wanted to show you. Oh, I might want to reduce the greens a little bit, but let's just go back to impression and run that one more time. Once again, open up our menu, change the size of the brush to a smaller one. Let's go with the middle one this time. Increase the size, the length, and reduce the spill. And just click OK. And reduce this all the way down. So now the parts that we already painted earlier will start to look even more painted. I'm not a fan of these little white splotches that happened during it, so we'll get rid of those. Once again, Alt Option, white brush, paint the effect on the areas you want to affect. Make sure it's not going on her skin or anything. And feather that sucker out. Before and after. So now we've just added a little bit more softness to the image. And just to tone down the greens a little bit, come into hue saturation and go to your greens. Not sure how much of the greens are green or yellow, so there is a bit there. But what I might want to do is just change the actual hue to reflect more of the green in the skirt, but I have to go into the yellows. So if I pull up the yellows, you can see a lot of that green is yellow. So let's pull it down this way and then reduce. So now we've reduced the greens before and after, but we've affected a lot of it. So let's invert that mask, and then that way we can come in and just affect the green leaves, because I really don't want to lose all of the color toning that I've done. But I'm not a fan of greens per se, like really green. Too much green. All right, and I mean, it's just personal preference, right? Like you might happen to love green. So I'm gonna leave it like this and feather out my mask. I'm going to flatten it, but now I'm just going to get rid of these odd little specks created. And it's not, you can see that it's actually a lamp. So we could create a light in it, but I'm just going to get rid of that. I find it distracting. Let's go and grab a dodge burn layer really quickly. And just create a little bit more definition in this area. So you can create depth quite easily by burning. For those of you that are traditional painters or digital artists, this is all everyday stuff for you. Just helps make things look a little bit more painterly. That spot there is bugging me. But that looks way better. So let's close the group and see the before and the after. So we've added that little bit of extra. Reduce that a little bit. There. Okay. I'm just going to get rid of that little white spots driving me nuts. And last but not least, let's add a little cherry cheeks and lips. And all these actions that I'm using, guys, are mine. And you can find them in my store, which I will link below. I do teach full fairy workshops on my network if you're ever interested in that. We typically need at least 10 students to proceed, and during the pandemic we haven't had enough interest. We've only ran one workshop. So if you're interested, you can always reach out or join my network, which will be posted below. So a little bit of blush, just a little bit. Feather that out a bit more and reduce. I'm going to feather her lip mask out a bit. Zoom out, and there you have it. That's all done. And so that's how I do a really quick painting like portrait without having a vignette that clips, but having really good color tones so that all of the colors blend really well together. And yeah, so this is an artistic portrait of an adult fairy. So I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions or comments, leave them below. And until next video, I'll see you then.